Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for your indulgence and let me come and participate today. Thanks to both of you for coming to talk to us about this important issue. Army Colonel Bob Crowley served as Senior Counterinsurgency Advisor to U.S. military commanders in 2013 and 2014. He stated, quote, "Every data point was altered to present the best picture possible. Surveys, for instance, were totally unreliable, but reinforced that everything we were doing was right, and we became a self-licking ice cream cone," close quote. I quote that partly because I really like the expression, self-licking ice cream cone. But in all seriousness, it reflects something that's very disturbing. This goes beyond the run-of-the-mill type of waste, fraud, and abuse situation that we see. The stakes are higher nowhere than they are when we put American blood and American treasure to a very substantial degree on the line. So what this reflects is a prolonged pattern, key points during this nearly 2-decade-long war effort, during which the American people were actively, knowingly, willfully deceived. They were lied to. This is clearly unacceptable, and in fact, describing it as such almost doesn't do justice to the concept of unacceptability. As a republic, it's wrong for us to have a government that provides deliberately false information to the people and to hide the truth from Congress, from the people's elected lawmakers, whose job it is to make sure that we set the right policy and that any wars that we're fighting are morally and legally and constitutionally justified and are bringing the benefits to public safety that a war really needs to be able to command in order to justify its existence. So, Colonel Davis, I'll start with you. How can the Pentagon rebuild and reestablish trust, the kind of trust in the American people that it needs to have?
Well, first of all, Senator, there has to be a decision at the very top that dishonesty is not going to be tolerated. And unfortunately, I almost chuckled, perversely so, I suppose, when you're talking, because to us on the ground, I mean, that was like common knowledge. Everyone knows that. Especially anytime a Codell comes over, they're shown what they're supposed to see. So they come in there, and the intent was that we're going to show you everything to reinforce your belief that this is going in the right direction, and all the things that we told you when we were sitting in these halls here to talk about and telling you how good things were going, we're on the right azimuth, et cetera. And you will only be shown briefings and data points and everything that just seem to just absolutely make it look like that's great. Well, the people underneath it that were putting this stuff together, of course, we know what's not being shown. We know the things that you're not seeing, the places you're not being taken to, and we knew that if you were, of course, it would be a dramatic, if not radically different outcome. But that's the honest truth is, and I just got to be frank with you, sir, a lot of the people over there in the military think that you guys aren't smart enough to be able to make those determinations. So we don't want to show you a comprehensive viewpoint. We just want to show you what you need to see so that you can go back and do the right thing. I'm just being blunt about it. Right. And that happens routinely. And that was one of the big drivers that led me in 2012 to come out and say, no, this is not right. You are being lied to, was the fact that Congress was being told the wrong thing. Because even in the things I came out at the time, I was not taking a position on what we should do, but on whatever Congress is being told, it has to be the truth because you make the decisions. The civilian control of the government decides whether we go to war, whether we don't go to war, whether we stay at war. Because you're the guys that we vote in to make that determination for the people. And my observation was that we, as military, were not doing that. We were keeping the truth from you. And so now then you think you're being told the truth, and in good conscience, you'll go out and continue something because it seems to make sense. And so to turn that around, it's going to take somebody at the top to say, look, whether you think that Congress is smart enough to figure this out or not doesn't make any difference. You're going to tell just the truth, and we're going to leave it up to our elected representatives to make the determination.
So what you're describing, in effect, is a significant disconnect between what was happening on the ground and what officials within the Pentagon were telling Seagar on the one hand and what they were telling Congress on the other. Is that right?
Well, not necessarily Cigar specific, because he actually got a lot of accurate information, but definitely what was being told in hearings.
Okay. So what are some of the barriers, what are the obstacles that were in the way of them telling the truth to Congress? Was it just an assessment? You described something a minute ago that perhaps some of the people on the ground were thinking members of Congress aren't smart enough to handle it, although we're certainly not going to be smart enough to handle it if we're not given the accurate information. It's not as if we have the ability to go to a different tour guide. It's not as if we have the ability to tour some of the countryside on our own without them deciding where we can go, because they're always going to be in the driver's seat there.
Well, I can give you a perfect example of how that works. It's institutionalized. When I came out in February of 2012 with my article and it hit the New York Times and it blasted all over the place, there just happened to be a scheduled Pentagon briefing the next day with the three-star ground commander for U.S. forces, General Scaparrotti at the time. And they asked him about this. They said, hey, did you see this report that just came out? What do you think about it? And he says, well, I saw it, but that's one person's viewpoint. You know, I mean, if you just look at one point, you could come up with the wrong information or the wrong idea. But I see all of these things you know, that are balanced. And in my view, you know, we're right on track and our assessments are actually right. Well, see, the idea is I can't tell members of Congress the good side and the bad side, because then you might accidentally, incorrectly think, well, then we should shut the war down. So you're only going to be shown what is the right thing to do, and that is to continue the war.
Nothing to see here.
Yes, sir.
You know, I remember September 11th as if it were yesterday. My daughter Eliza was a baby at the time. Shortly thereafter, as you recall, we undertook the war effort in Afghanistan. At the time that occurred, I remember being concerned. I didn't hold public office, didn't work in government, just as a private citizen. But what we were told was there was a clear objective. Clear objective was to retaliate against al-Qaeda for the September 11th attacks and to make sure that Afghanistan didn't serve as a stronghold where the Taliban could gain momentum and establish a sufficiently strong foothold so as to launch other attacks on the United States. Since then, 19 years have elapsed. My baby daughter Eliza is now in college. We're still there. That war is still going on. The Taliban is still a thing, and yet I'm not sure exactly what we have to show for it. In the meantime, I'm in my 10th year in the United States Senate now. I've had a lot of questions about this war, and I've asked a lot of questions that have not brought about satisfactory answers from people at the Pentagon. Notwithstanding my persistence in asking or my attempt to be thorough in the manner in which I answered questions, I sensed for a lot of the time that something was terribly wrong because some of the answers didn't seem to make much sense. But I guess what I'm getting to is I'd like to know from you, what is the objective in Afghanistan? I'm not sure I know anymore.
Yes, sir. There, in the initial, you were dead right. President Bush gave an absolutely militarily attainable mission in October of 2001. It was absolutely correct. It was something we could do. We had the military capability to do, which was to defeat the Taliban and to degrade the al-Qaeda's ability to conduct operations against the United States. Those were absolutely accomplished 100% by about, maybe as late as this next summer. So by 2002, then we should have returned because there was no military mission left to accomplish. We absolutely annihilated the Taliban. We didn't just defeat them. So at that time, there was no military foe left to keep our troops there for. Many people often claim that, when Bush went to Iraq, he took his eye off the ball and that's what caused the problem. No, there was no ball to keep your eye on for a number of years after that. We should have retired, but President Bush then and President Obama deepened later on changed the mission to a nation building which cannot be accomplished with military forces.
Hence the self-licking ice cream cone metaphor.
Yes, sir. To answer the next part of your question, there is no strategy right now. None. There's no strategy that, if you accomplish A, B, and C, the war will be over. Nothing like that exists. We're merely conducting operations with no objective.
So if that's the case, Colonel, at what point do we say, okay, that's it, this war is over, it's time to go home? Or is this indeed an indefinite conflict, a war in
2012.
perpetuity?
2012. That's when we should have done it. We should absolutely do it right now, because every day that goes forth, you're going to have more men like those who were murdered over the weekend for no good. Everybody says they're heroes and all this stuff, but sir, we have to be honest and say they lost their lives for nothing. They didn't defend American democracy. They didn't secure our safety. They were just killed because we won't shut the war down, and we just keep going. And that just grieves me more than I can even explain to you, sir.
It seems to me that when something has taken place, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your indulgence. I realize I'm dangerously over time now. When the United States has been involved in a conflict for this long, it has cost us as many lives as it has, that has produced literally tens of thousands of American casualties and thousands of deaths on top of those, on which we've spent trillions of dollars, when we've been lied to over and over again about what its purpose is and about what steps we're making toward a purpose that we're later told is an illusory one. If we were in a law school setting, I'd describe this declaration of war as void under the rule against perpetuities. The problem here is that we have no objective and no real end in sight. There are those who, in that circumstance, say, yeah, but you can't just pull out now, because if we were to pull out now, it'd leave a void, and that void would cause other problems, and then we'd be looking at another 9/11. And so we have to pull out, if at all, very, very gradually, so as not to create that void, so as not to make the United States more vulnerable. What do you say to that?
Oh, that's one of the most pernicious myths that there is out there. As General Lute talked earlier and really laid it out for one of the best ways I've seen recently, we do not need troops on the ground to keep us safe here, to keep another 9/11 from happening. As we've seen graphically depicted with the taking out of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, we didn't have troops there. With al-Baghdadi, with Soleimani the other day, with the guy from AQAP in Yemen, even after that, we can take out any direct threat to the United States anywhere in the world that they come to because of our extraordinary power to project power and our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So that is taking place everywhere, regardless of where the threat may arise from. But the fear that if we leave, we're going to cause a void or that there's going to be a civil war belies the fact that there is a war going on right now. The casualties are higher this year than they've ever been since 2001. So there's nothing to create more. Now, that's not to say that our departure wouldn't cause some real problems, but if we do this in a professional, sequenced way in a short period of time, maybe 12 months, then we can say it's going to be on you. And I do differ from a lot of people here where I'll say, I think it's okay to put some difficulty on the shoulder of the Afghans, and I think that they'll respond very well. I have some good friends who are still in Afghanistan, and I want to see them be safe. But I think if you put responsibility on their shoulder, and they know their life is on the line if they don't make whatever deal is necessary with the Taliban or with these other warlords or stuff, they're historically used to doing that. They will do it. But as long as we keep this thing going on into perpetuity with no end, they have no motivation to make the hard choices.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your frankness and for informing us of what you see are great problems. I want to thank President Trump for his willingness to ask difficult questions about this war, about other wars, and I want to encourage President Trump to follow his instincts.
And if I could say, sir, I think President Trump might be the only one that could make that hard choice, because there would be a firestorm if anybody talks about actually ending this. But if anybody can do it, I think it might be him.
I agree completely, and I encourage him to do so. Let's get out.
Amen.
19 years is too long. Let's end it. Thank you.